Everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining this training, which is part of the WEAC Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Center, the TCTAC. This is the EPA Region 2 TCTAC for New York, New Jersey. And today we're going to be doing a training that's an overview of federal and state, New Jersey, New York environmental justice laws and policies. Thank you for joining us. And you'll see on the screen right now, these are the logos of all the partner organizations in this TCTAC. My name is Al Huang. I'm with the Institute for Policy Integrity at NYU School of Law. And I will be presenting with Michelle Floranton, who's also with Policy Integrity, our Environmental Justice Legal Fellow. And we have a fantastic guest presenter, Kim Gaddy, who's the founder and executive director of the South Ward Environmental Alliance in New York, New Jersey. And we're really excited to have you here today. So let's get the show going. We have some housekeeping for some logistics. Just want to let everyone know the meeting is being recorded, and the recording and the slides will be shared on our TCTAC website and sent to everybody who registered. Please keep yourself muted while presenters are speaking. I'm sure you've all heard this before, so please just be mindful of that. If you have questions prior to the Q&A portion, which is at the end of the presentation, please drop it in the chat and we'll do our best to get to it. And finally, during the Q&A section, we'll be answering questions from the chat, and you can use the raise hand reaction Zoom if you want to ask a live question. This is just a map of all the 18 TCTACs in the US right now. There are 15 regional, 3 national. We are Region 2, which is New Jersey, New York, Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, and 7 federally recognized Indian nations. There are 2 TCTACs in our region. This is the New York, New Jersey TCTAC. There's another TCTAC that's covering Puerto Rico, US Virgin Islands. So just a brief on the goals of the WEAC TCTAC. Number one, it's to identify grant opportunities, and we've done various different trainings in that area. The second goal is to assist in preparing grant applications and managing grant funding. The third is to build capacity to effectively engage with decision makers. Today's training is really focused on this third goal for the TCTAC. And finally, to develop collaborative community-based networks and partnerships. So here we go. This is, again, the title slide you saw earlier, and let's get into it here. Today's trainings, here are our goals. One is to provide a brief overview of how government is structured, executive, legislative, judicial, and how it makes laws and advances policy. So it'll be a little bit of like a civics of how government works, but it's important to understand that to kind of explain where are the laws and policies around environmental justice and where do they come from. Second, it's to do an overview of legal authorities that require government at the federal and state levels to consider EJ their decisions. To discuss possibilities and limitations of EJ laws and policies, and to explore ways that communities can engage government on EJ issues. So we're going to start with the executive branch, and it's important to understand what the executive branch is because it really is where a lot of EJ laws and policies come from. Most of you probably know the executive branch consists of the president or governor federally in the state. And generally what they do is they set policy priorities for the government, and there's 4 major functions that they have. One is, we're going to talk a bit about, our executive orders. These have the weight of law and can be used to implement policies, manage the executive branch, or interpret existing laws. It's important to note they can be revoked, and they're by only another president, a president or governor, and they're non-enforceable by citizens or through the courts. And we'll talk a little about that later. The other kind of main executive branch power is the power to have policy directive and issue memoranda. What this really is they're issue-based outlines of specific policies or initiatives. And while they don't have the same legal weight as an executive order, they still guide the actions of government agencies and departments. The third major power is budgeting. So they can set policy priorities by proposing government spending budgets. We'll talk a bit later about the legislative branch's power of the purse to actually approve these budgets. But by proposing budgets, they can decide where they want to direct spending towards certain programs or initiatives, and they can effectively shape policy outcomes. The TCTACs, what we have right now, this is an example of budgeting that the executive branch can carry out and how they can move policy. Finally, it's appointing officials. The executive can appoint officials to lead government agencies and departments, and these appointees play a significant role in shaping public policy through their leadership and their decision-making within respective agencies. So agencies and departments, these are things you think of like EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, Department of Interior. These are part of the executive branch, and they are charged with generally implementing policy priorities of the president and governor. They also create rules and regulations to implement and enforce laws passed by the legislative branch. And they create guidance and tools to interpret and implement laws. We'll talk about all this in a bit more detail in this presentation. Finally, agency and departments also manage government and or publicly owned resources like lands and minerals. The next branch we're going to talk about is the legislatures. This is a branch of government responsible for making laws. And in both federal and state government, the legislature serves as a forum for representatives to debate, propose, amend, and enact legislation that addresses the needs and concerns of the public. And federally, Congress has the authority to pass laws and approve the national budget. This is the power of purse I was mentioning earlier. And state legislators also enact state laws, approve state budgets, and exercise a certain level of oversight over state agencies and officials. And then finally, there's the judicial branch. We're not going to really focus on the judicial too much, but generally, federal and state courts serve as the branch of government that's responsible for interpreting and applying the law. So I think since we're talking about law and policy, I think it's probably useful to talk about, well, what's the difference between the two? And this little graphic right here, you'll see the top is our US constitutions. Then we have laws, regulations, and other documents, guidance, policies, etc. Laws are written and passed by the legislative branch, signed and implemented by the executive branch, and can be challenged through the judiciary. And laws establish requirements and prohibitions. Then oftentimes after a law is passed, regulations need to be published by executive branch agencies that have responsibility. Oftentimes the law says what agency is the one responsible, and they interpret the law and how the law will be implemented. And the regulations also have requirements and prohibitions inside them. Then you have executive branch other documents that they can generate, such as guidance or other policy statements, which further clarify how an agency understands and implements existing laws and regulations. Executive orders are a hybrid that live between regulations and other documents. We'll talk a bit about that in a little bit. And finally, there's agency guidance and other policy documents to describe or suggest recommended actions. And we're going to talk about that in this presentation. Guidance and policy documents do not provide mandatory requirements unless they're incorporated into a regulation, or oftentimes under the terms and condition of agreement, such as a funding agreement might have certain requirements inside of it. So executive orders for environmental justice, that's most of where the federal legal authority to consider environmental justice is in executive orders at the federal level. Part of that is due to politics in the sense that Congress has not acted to enact any environmental justice laws per se. So most of this has come from presidential executive orders, and what we call kind of the OG executive order was signed in 1994 by President Clinton. It's called 12898. They're all referred to by these numbers, and these are issued every time a new executive order is issued. This was kind of the first major executive order on environmental justice, and what it did is it required agencies to identify and address disproportionately high and adverse human health or the environmental effects of the programs, policies, and activities on minority and low-income populations. So this is where a lot of the EJ activities within the federal government comes from. It comes from this language that says they have to identify and address these EJ impacts to communities. It also required that agencies meaningfully involve potential affected communities in decision-making processes. And that's where you get a lot of the procedural pieces of environmental justice requirements at the federal government. And finally, it required that agencies collect, maintain, and analyze data on the demographic characteristics of populations affected by their programs and policies to assess what the impacts are on people of color and low-income communities. It's from this last one that you get a lot of the tools that we see that we're going to talk a bit later about how to identify EJ communities that the federal government has created. More recently, we have Executive Order 14008 that President Biden issued in 2021. And this was a really focused on climate policy, and it articulated the major climate policy goals for the Biden administration. But it also created an interagency advisory committee on EJ that reports to the White House. The 12898 had created an interagency advisory committee too, but that one reported to EPA. What this 2021 executive order does is it centralizes some of that reporting to the White House to get more accountability. Because again, the executive orders come from the president and apply to the employees of the federal government, all the agencies. It also created the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Committee that reports directly to the White House too as well. It also created Justice 40, which establishes a goal that at least 40% of the benefits of certain federal investments flow to disadvantaged communities. And for folks who want to learn more about Justice 40, we actually did, as part of this TCTAC, a training on Justice 40 and the CJS tool. And you can find that on our TCTAC's website for the recording of that training. And finally, it also created the EJ scorecard to evaluate and track progress of federal agencies in advancing environmental justice and Justice 40. Another significant executive order that was issued by President Biden in 2023 is 14096. And this establishes that EJ is central to the implementation of our bedrock civil rights laws, and environmental laws. It requires agencies to identify and address cumulative impacts of pollution, climate change, and other burdens on EJ communities. And it also requires agencies to update and implement EJ strategic plans, which should contain the agency's visions, goals, and actions to advance EJ and be updated every 5 years. It also created a White House Office of Environmental Justice that lives within the White House and created a new federal definition for EJ, so there's consistent definition across the board. This is the definition on the side. I'm not going to go through it because of time, but feel free to peruse it. I think what's most important about this, though, is that it essentially takes 12898 and updates it and reaffirms it and then adds more meat on the bones as far as what agencies are required to do. So federal laws related to EJ, we've mentioned already that executive orders are the primary source of law on EJ. Again, I think it's kind of a reminder of how tentative environmental justice at the federal level is, because we don't have legislated federal laws on EJ, which I'll talk about in a second. What we really have are these executive orders, which live from president to president and essentially send the charge to the executive branch agencies on what they're required to do in considering environmental justice. We do have, as most of you know, environmental laws like the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act. They sometimes have provisions related to considering vulnerable populations like children, elderly, people with disabilities, or cumulative environmental burdens, but they don't specifically have EJ requirements in them. But again, what the executive orders do is that when agencies implement environmental laws through rulemaking and guidance, they often incorporate the directives in the executive orders to include EJ considerations. Other federal laws related to EJ are the civil rights laws, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Fair Housing Act of 1968, the Americans with Disability Act. These all provide some limited protection to EJ communities. None of these laws in the text of them themselves specifically focus or mention environmental justice. But they all are focused on the idea of prohibiting discrimination, whether intentional or discriminatory impacts based on race and or disability. And they've all been applied in EJ contexts with some limited success. The other major area in federal laws related to EJ, and this actually is legislated, are funding laws, which have provided substantial funding for EJ, quote unquote, disadvantaged and or overburdened communities. You all might be aware of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. Both of them have provisions that allocate billions of dollars towards disadvantaged and overburdened communities. I mentioned guidances. There are some key guidances that are out there. There are many that have EJ as part of them, but I'm just going to highlight three that are quite important. The first one comes from the White House Council on Environmental Quality, which is the office within the White House charged with environmental issues. And they issued in 1997, it's rather old, but it's still active, the Environmental Justice National Environmental Policy Act guidance. CEQ has oversight on how agencies implement NEPA, which is this landmark environmental law. And what it does is it requires agencies to assess the environmental effects of proposed major actions. So for major federal actions that may significantly affect the environment or human health, you have to go through a process of considering what those environmental effects are. And this guidance provided specific recommendations on how to consider EJ in that NEPA process. So this would apply to things like highway projects, dredging of bays, things like that. And of note is in 2024, CEQ issued updated regulations on NEPA. So as mentioned earlier, the agencies often issue the regulations on the law to provide more guidance on how they should be applied. And the proposed regulations contain several new EJ provisions in them. EPA, not surprisingly, has issued two really important guidances on EJ, which many agencies also look at and think and consider. The first was in 2010, which is a guidance on considering EJ during the development of a regulatory action. And it's a step-by-step guide that helps EPA staff ask questions and evaluate key EJ considerations at key points of the rulemaking process. And then related to that, in 2016, they issued a technical guidance for assessing environmental justice and regulatory analysis. And what this was is like a very detailed guidance that talks about how people should assess EJ issues in rulemaking in an analytical fashion. This is what you see a lot of in EPA rulemaking, where they do this EJ analysis. A lot of this guidance appears inside this particular guidance. And just for everyone who knows, they recently are revised and updated it to reflect best available methodological approaches and analytical tools to use. And that's currently going through the process of notice and comment and with EPA right now. The other major piece in the federal level are tools that have been created to identify EJ communities. Agencies have developed various tools to help general public and agency staff analyze EJ issues. One that's pretty significant is one that EPA developed called EJ Screen. It's a publicly available mapping and screening tool that combines environmental and socioeconomic data. And some agencies use EJ Screen as a tool when performing EJ analysis as part of the regulatory actions. It's publicly accessible online. You could look up your own community and find out lots about demographics of those, socio-demographics of those communities, as well as what are the different types of environmental facilities around your community that may or may not be impacting your health. I mentioned a bit about Justice 40 earlier. As part of the Justice 40 initiative, the CEQ in the White House, Council for Environmental Quality, created another tool called the Climate Economic Justice Screening Tool, which is a geospatial tool designed to identify who is a disadvantaged community that should benefit from Justice 40 programs. Again, we did a training on this for this TCTAC, which you could find on the WEAC TCTAC website, the Justice 40 CJS training. So that's the main summary of major federal EJ laws and policies. I'm now going to introduce Kim Gaddy, who's the founder and executive director of South Ward Environmental Alliance. She's going to talk a bit about what it takes to win these types of policies, and especially at the state level. So I'm going to hand it over to Kim Gaddy.
Thank you, Al, and welcome everyone, and thank you for participating in this very informative training session. As was stated, my name is Kim Gaddy. I am the founder and executive director of the South Ward Environmental Alliance. We are located in the South Ward of the city of Newark. And just to give you a snapshot of our community, the South Ward is the backyard of the third largest port in the nation and the Newark Airport. And our community is surrounded by cumulative impacts of pollution, anywhere from the largest metal recycling facility in the world is located in our South Ward community, to a Superfund site, to recycling facilities, to polluting industries. All of this is within a 12-block radius of one of our neighborhoods. And so the cumulative impacts of pollution is impacting our health on a daily basis. SWIA is also a partner coordinating outreach activities in underserved communities in Newark and the greater Newark area for TCTAC Region 2. And so when you think about what is happening in our community, this is why we began the fight to make sure New Jersey had a cumulative impacts law. And I need to shout out some of the partners along the way that participated in this. So we have Ironbound Community Corporation, New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance, Clean Water Action. We were the leading partners of fighting for this. And, it's really important that we stick to our fights because this fight took us 12 years for the state of New Jersey to establish the strongest environmental justice law in the nation. And it took us 12 years to get it. And when we think about it, it is really important that as EJ activists and community activists, it's important to make sure that you have environmental champions. And so in order for us to get a state law passed, we had to seek the support of our senators, our assembly, and of course our governors. And when you think about the environment and what we experience in overburdened communities, oftentimes there are not many environmental champions. Oftentimes those individuals representing our communities who look like us, Black and brown, are not as familiar with our environmental justice fight. And so we had to begin to educate and present ourselves before these individuals over and over again. And so oftentimes those senators and assembly people had the political will to do right by us, but then the governor was not there to support us. And so we said, let's look at what is actually happening. We know that we have to organize ourselves in our local communities and then use that strength to support statewide legislation. So we said, okay, we just can't keep sitting around, and we know individuals are dying each and every day from cumulative impacts of pollution. So at the time, I was the chair of the City of Newark's Environmental Commission. Cory Booker was the mayor at that point. And we decided as a group collectively, we have power in Newark. It was two strong North-based groups in this fight. And so we said, you know what, let's begin to look at what we can do locally. And so we decided that we was going to take this fight to the city of Newark. And we was able to then have meetings with the administration and the city and get them to understand and talk about cumulative impacts of pollution. When you think about the Ironbound community, and that's the East Ward of our city of Newark, they have the Beast of the East, the largest incinerator, most polluting facility, right? And so we was able to now utilize a lot of what was happening across our whole city to get the city to understand that it was time for us to establish an ordinance, right, around cumulative impacts. And so we was able to gather support from our council members and then Mayor Book at the time. And so from 2013 to 2016, we was fighting, trying to get a local cumulative impacts law passed in the city of Newark. And then Ras Baraka came in as our mayor, and he was able in July 13, 2021, to establish an environmental justice cumulative impacts ordinance. So there was two layers there. And so once we had the state's largest city now having an ordinance and the mayor from overburdened community talking about cumulative impacts of pollution, we was able to now say, who can we go to at the state level? And they can see the support that we had within Newark. and we were still talking to individuals in Jersey City. Camden was coming along and trying to look at a cumulative impacts ordinance as well. And so we had different places where a lot of Black and brown individuals resided, fighting for the fighting for their lives and making sure we had some kind of law for cumulative impacts. And so after our North victory, it was a little bit more easier to now go into the state and get champions at the Senate level and the Assembly level. And then we was able to get the governor, Phil Murphy, to then pass the strongest environmental justice law. But what I want you to take away from this is that we know the power is invested in us at the community level. We are the local experts. We are those individuals who suffer the most from the pollution sources. And so we have to fight at every level. Sometimes the state might do it before the city. Sometimes the city is going to be before the state. And then sometimes we have to combine the city and the state and go national to make sure that our voices are being heard. So the Southport Environmental Alliance and our coalition wanted to make sure that residents had a seat at the table and that their voices was heard each and every day. And so the victory and the success story was from those individual fighters who was fighting each and every day for success and some relief in their communities. And so I'm hoping that when you see all of what has transpired, that you feel that you have the power because it's vested in you. And all it takes is one person to step up and make the change that they need in their respective communities. And so I want to also let you know that we have a saying in environmental justice that nothing about us without us is for us. And so we are the ones who can make the change. And so I want to leave you with that, and power to the people. Thank you, Al.
Thank you so much, Kim. I hope everyone is feeling as inspired as I am right now. And I just want to say again that Kim Gaddy has been instrumental to making sure that the environmental justice law in New Jersey came to be what it is today. So for a brief reintroduction, my name is Michelle Florentine. I'm a legal fellow at the Institute for Policy Integrity. And for the latter half of this webinar, I'm going to be talking about the key state environmental justice laws and policies in New York and New Jersey. Next bullet. So this training is a brief overview of New Jersey and New York's environmental justice laws and policies. It's by no means a comprehensive overview of every single law, policy, and guidance out there. Instead, we just selected a few very pivotal pieces of environmental justice laws, policies, and guidances in these states. Today, we'll cover first, the executive environmental justice actions by governors. We'll also talk about agency environmental justice actions and state environmental justice laws. So let's just dive in and start with New Jersey. So in New Jersey, today we'll cover Executive Order 23, which was signed by Governor Phil Murphy. Relevant state agencies and entities that make decisions affecting EJ communities. And New Jersey's EJ law that Kim just mentioned. It's also called the Cumulative Impacts Law or the Cumulative Impacts Ordinance. So let's start with New Jersey's EJ executive order. So in 2018, Governor Murphy signed Executive Order 23, which ordered the Department of Environmental Protection, also known as DEP, to create a guidance directing executive branch departments and agencies on how to consider EJ in implementing their statutory and regulatory responsibilities. And so in response to this executive order, DEP issued an EJ guidance in September of 2020. And this EJ guidance is called Furthering the Promise, a guidance document for advancing environmental justice across state government. Now, The first step to ensuring EJ consideration across government is properly identifying EJ communities. And this is what Furthering the Promise aims to do. So Furthering the Promise identifies 3 criteria for identifying EJ communities. The first is there being a community of concern. And this is determined by various thresholds for low income, educational attainment, things of that nature. The second criteria is presence of disproportionate environmental and public health stressors. And the third is the absence or lack of environmental and public health benefits. And the guidance documents includes like a long list of what these benefits and stressors can include. There's also a tool called the Environmental Justice Mapping Assessment and Protection Tool, also known as EJMAP, that provides information on the presence of stressors and the absence of benefits across the state. So you can use this tool as well to try to get a feeling of the environmental justice conditions across the state. So at this point, you're probably wondering, okay, which New Jersey entities do work that implicates environmental justice? This slide, I won't go through in each bullet point, but it provides resources and links to various different entities and agencies in New Jersey that do work that implicates environmental justice, and that might also have to abide by Furthering the Promise, the EJ guidance. So I encourage you, once we display all these slides after the webinar, to go to these various agencies and entities and see what type of work they're doing. There's also county and municipal level agencies and entities. So counties, municipalities, cities, they might have their own agencies and departments that provide services that affect conditions in EJ communities. And these entities can include public works departments, utility authorities, entities overseeing water quality, waste management entities, and housing and economic development departments. So when you're thinking about, okay, what should be in my legal toolkit and what are the gaps in state policy and federal policy that need to be filled on a more local level, there is space in your own community, in your own hometown, to make sure that there are EJ policies and laws in place to protect your own community. So for more examples of what type of entities are out there, New Jersey has a searchable database of county, municipal, and local government services information, and EPA also has their own list of some relevant city and county level agencies that do environmental work. So the next legal tool that I want you to know about in New Jersey is the environmental justice law that Kim mentioned in her introduction. So New Jersey's EJ law was signed into law in 2020, and the regulations that implement this law were finally adopted in 2023. So New Jersey's EJ law has very specific requirements. The first being that permit applicants must prepare an environmental justice impact statement. They also have to engage directly with members of their proposed host community and collect all public comments and respond to them in writing. So the goal of these requirements is to make sure that communities have a voice up front before decisions are made, to make sure that any issues regarding cumulative impacts in their communities are addressed and recognized. DP also has to evaluate whether pollution from the proposed facility would cause or contribute to environmental and public health stressors at levels disproportionate to those in less burdened communities. And DEP also has another requirement, which is where disproportionate impacts are not avoidable, DEP could limit certain new facilities or subject existing facilities to additional permanent conditions that reduce the environmental and public health stressors affecting the community. So there's also 8 types of facilities that are covered by this environmental justice law. I won't go through every one in detail, but just to name a few major sources of air pollution are covered by this law, as well as sludge processing facilities, sewage treatment plants, landfills, scrap metal facilities. And so I want you to think about what's in your community. Are one of these types of facilities in your backyard? And if so, this law is meant for you and to protect your community. So just take a look at this law. Also, advocates, permit applicants, and DEP can use DEP's environmental justice mapping assessment and protection tool to identify overburdened communities or communities that have either one or multiple types of pollution sources. So now we're going to dive into New York. So uh, today we're going to cover a few environmental justice laws. The first being the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is an environmental law that has some EJ provisions in it. And then we're going to talk about relevant state agencies and entities that make decisions affecting EJ. And we'll talk about New York's own version of its environmental justice law. So let's start with New York's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is also known as the CLCPA. So in 2019, Governor Cuomo signed New York's CLCPA into law, which sets ambitious requirements for reducing statewide greenhouse gases. The CLCPA includes provisions to ensure a more equitable approach to distributing energy investments and associated benefits. And specifically, there is a benefits of spending provision in the CLCPA, which states that 35% with a goal of 40% of benefits of spending on clean energy and energy efficiency programs, projects, or investments shall flow to disadvantaged communities, also known as DACs. And the clean energy and energy efficiency issue areas include housing, workforce development, pollution reduction, low income energy assistance, energy, and transportation, as well as economic development. So the CLCPA actually tasked a climate justice working group to develop criteria for determining DACs. And the CLCPA also states that DACs should be based on geographic, public health, environmental hazard, and socioeconomic criteria, including but not limited to areas burdened by cumulative environmental pollution and other hazards that can lead to negative public health effects. The second being areas with concentrations of people that are of low income, high unemployment, high rent burden, low levels of home ownership, low levels of educational attainment, or members of a group that have historically been discriminated against on the basis of race or ethnicity. And the third criteria is that areas vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, such as flooding, storm surges, and urban heat island effects. So, which New York entities do work that implicates environmental justice? Now, statewide, there are a variety of entities. A few of them are on this slide right here. And these are entities, some of these entities also have to report based off of the benefits of spending provision to the CLCPA. But there's also a lot of different entities that will go into depth in the issue brief. And on the county and municipal level, this slide is the same as what I just went through for New Jersey. I just want to highlight again that you should really think about what state policies and guidances, what gaps they have on the statewide level and how you can fill them on a more localized level. For example, in New York and Buffalo, there have been movements to create environmental justice laws just for those cities. But if you want more examples of what entities do work on a more localized level, there is a searchable database of government services in New York as well. And EPA also has a list of some relevant New York City and county level agencies as well. So now we'll discuss New York's environmental justice law. So in 2023, Governor Hochul signed into law New York's EJ law, which requires analyzing and considering environmental justice issues when approving permit applications. And this law requires permit applicants to provide an existing burden report. It also grants DEC authority to deny permits, permit modifications, and renewals if the project causes or contributes to a disproportionate pollution burden on the disadvantaged community. So this is aiming to try to address the cumulative impacts of multiple sources of pollution that typically overburden environmental justice communities. There are also a bunch of additional New York laws, policies, and resources out there. I won't go through all of them today, but the slide is just going to highlight a few. The first being the Green Amendment to New York State Constitution. If folks don't know, in 2021, the people voted to amend the New York State Constitution to include environmental rights. And the amendment specifically states each person shall have a right to clean air and water and a healthy environment. Another policy, or I should say law, is New York State has an Environmental Quality Review Act known as SECRA or SECR. And it's an environmental review law that requires all local, regional, and state agencies to follow to evaluate the environmental impacts and social and economic considerations for certain project actions. There's also Article 10 of New York's Public Service Law, which requires environmental justice considerations in the permitting of major electric generating facilities. And there is DEC Commissioner Policy 29, also known as CP 29, and this states that DEC must identify potential EJ areas during the permit review process. Something else I want to flag is that there are various EJ mapping and tracking tools, including DEC's mapping data, the ArcGIS web map of potential EJ areas in New York, and a map developed through the Climate Justice Working Group that I mentioned before. The Climate Justice Working Group that was created under the CLCPA, they did a lot of work to figure out what criteria should be used to determine who is an overburdened community or a disadvantaged community. And so they have a ton of information on the different types of environmental justice conditions across the state at this link. And so now we're going to begin the Q&A section of the webinar.
Hi, everyone. So if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand and ask them, or if you've put them in the chat. We have several here that we can kind of get started with. I think the first one I see here is, does EJ law apply to Indian country? I think I can take this one. It's a complicated question, but I think the main thing to point out is that most of those, and we're talking about federal government, I'm assuming here, but we can, I guess, state government as well. But federally, the executive orders on environmental justice I was mentioning for all of them mention that those executive orders apply to how the government interacts and treats Indian country, tribes, native nations, tribal nations as well. But you have to also keep in mind that each one of those federally recognized tribes also, they're sovereign nations. So they have their own system of laws and environmental regulations. And so those executive orders don't apply to those nations, but it does apply with how government, the federal agencies, interact with them. So it would apply to them, but once the tribe itself and its own government, they would be able, those executive orders and laws don't apply to them unless there's some kind of treaty or they've delegated it or something along those lines. So hopefully that answers that question. We have another one here. What has been the best practice to define community benefits for Justice 40? How is environmental justice defined in Justice 40? Does anyone want to answer that one? Well, I think the first thing is we did do a training on Justice 40 and suggest and how you can qualify or find out whether you qualify as a disadvantaged community that would receive Justice 40 benefits. And I think one thing that's just important to point out just from the get-go of this is that Justice 40 doesn't use the word environmental justice as a definition for who's a beneficiary of the benefits. It uses the term disadvantaged communities, which is not the same as environmental justice in the sense that there are some factors such as race that aren't considered in that, and that was done intentionally for various reasons.
And just to add on to that, if you go to the Suggest website, and for those who don't know what Suggest is, it's the climate and economic justice screening tool. Sorry, I had to remind myself what each letter stood for there. And when you use the mapping tool, you'll see on the right-hand panel a bunch of different thresholds and criteria that the tool is using to determine what is a DAC. But there are various different environmental and public health factors in there, including whether you're near a Superfund site, whether you have a lot of like pollution from transportation or water quality issues. And so it really runs the gamut. It even includes energy burdens in there as well. So I really encourage you to take a look as if you're looking to see how what Justice 40 labels as a disadvantaged community, how that's defined under Justice 40.
Okay, let's see what other questions we have here. Does New York have anticipated timeline for publishing regulations for implementation of the law signed in 2023? Are there any public meetings scheduled?
Can you repeat, Al, which law they're referring to?
Oh, good point. It doesn't say here, but I'm guessing they're referring to the environmental justice law. Yeah.
Yeah, so as background, when Al went over this in his part of the presentation, but when a law is signed into law by the governor, it may require the implementation and creation of different types of regulations to make sure that the law itself is implemented and is used. And so I think you're referring, this question is referring to New Jersey or New York. New York. I think in terms of figuring out if there are any public hearings scheduled, I personally don't know offhand, but if you go to some agency websites, I can figure out who actually asked this question and refer you to the correct agencies that are dealing with the implementation of regulations.
Okay, we have another question here. I mean, there's been a lot of questions in the chat that I started to answer about executive orders. And this one says, can the president change funding midstream? So executive order budgets have to be approved or eliminated by Congress. Just need to clarify for myself. So I don't think there's like one universal answer for this, but I mean, the best answer I could give is that executive orders themselves don't have budgets tied to them. Usually there are directives on actions to be taken by the executive branch agencies, right? So the EJ executive orders we were talking about earlier, 12898, 14096, those are all directives to agencies on what they should be doing to consider EJ. And some of them are very prescriptive, like write guidance, like 14096 encourages issuing guidances, right? So they don't necessarily have budgets tied to them. Then it's up to that agency to then implement what's in the executive order. And agencies, the president sets their budget, but agencies also propose their budgets and in concert with the White House, and OMB is the other agency as well. And the entire budget for federal government needs to go to Congress to be approved, right? And there's a lot of negotiation that can happen there where Congress does not want to fund certain things, but the executive order themselves don't have budgets tied to them. And but going back to the question about whether a president can change funding midstream, they have discretion to decide where they're going to have their policy priorities be. But generally, when something's budgeted, usually, like for example, these TCTACs are budgeted, that money's in there, it's been allocated to be spent. So to undo that might be a little challenging, but a new president coming in could revoke an EO or propose a different budget. Hopefully that answers that question. There's another one here. Where is the best place to keep up to date on new and existing EJ laws and policies? It's a good question. There is a site. We can get back to you on that. I'm spacing on it right now, but I think it's UCSF School of Law in Hastings. So it's the University of California Law School of Hastings. Does have a website that tracks state and federal EJ laws and policies. I'm actually not sure how often it's updated, but I often go to it to see. You can search by states and figure out what laws they have in the books, what policies they have on the books, and there's some analysis in there too. But that's probably one of the better places. We'll get the link to that, and we'll send that around. One thing we do want to do after this training is put together additional resources based on these questions. So we'll be sure to get back to you on that. Going down this list, so I see one here. What are the chances of EJ laws being grandfathered in? In the destruction of wetlands in the EJ community, the ULURP process was approved in 2017, and the state system permit approved in around 2020-21. New York State DEC did not follow SECRA. There were court appeals after that. I'm not sure I fully understand this question because I think there's different. The ULURP process, from my understand, is the land use approval process that the City Council of New York City goes through. But I also see it. I think the question really is, if EJ laws have been passed by a legislature and the law itself does not have a sunset period, then those laws are in effect. So I don't know about grandfathered. Maybe whoever asked that question could provide additional kind of clarification.
Yeah, I provided that question. What question would you like me to clarify? What part of this?
The one I just read. Yeah, like what are the chances of EJ laws being grandfathered in?
Right.
The one, yeah.
Well, we were fighting to preserve an 18-acre wetland that was right across the street from an EJ community, and we went through the ULURP process. The City Council approved not only the rezoning and the and other things, but also the destruction of the wetland. They approved it. Then it went to New York State DEC. One of the requirements of SECRA was that they provide a hearing, a public hearing with enough letters. We provided 1,700 letters to DEC, and they said it was not warranted. So that didn't happen, and they did not give us a new EIS either. So we were in court until very recently.
Okay, I guess and the question about grandfathering in, I guess I still don't understand.
Yeah, at one point, this is a very old. The New York City sold these properties, the tidal wetland and the freshwater wetland, to the developer in 1977 and 84. That was the time when the water issue was not settled yet, and so the developer went to the Freshwater Wetland Appeal Board, and they were grandfathered in at that point, so they could destroy the wetland. It was
Gabrielle, thank you for the question. I think maybe what we can do is we can talk offline because
that would be great.
It's way more complicated, I think, than the question is. And
Yeah,
I'm happy to
yeah.
talk more about this with you offline.
That would be great.
Okay.
Yes.
So since we're winding down time, I just want to point out, right, this is the final slide here. We do have a survey that you can complete about this training so we can learn from these trainings and make them more responsive to your needs. There's a QR code right here. And also, if you need technical assistance, you can also scan this QR on the right that, and there's a form you could fill out. And of course, you can always email the EJ TCTAC at weact.org, or visit and sign up for the newsletter at weact.org/TCTAC.
And if you have, I know there were a lot of questions that we didn't get to today, but we just want to flag that we'll be releasing an issue brief sometime after this webinar that tries to address the questions that we couldn't get to today and provides a more comprehensive, detailed overview of both federal and state EJ laws and policies for the Region 2 TCTAC. And also later on in our series of webinars, we'll be doing a training on administrative advocacy, which I think will also be a continuation of a conversation on all these different types of EJ laws and policies we've talked about today and how to get involved and publicly and participate.
And just to be clear, this was meant to be an overview because kind of start that conversation. And as Michelle's pointing out, in future trainings that are part of this curriculum arc, we will be getting into federal processes. So we'll kind of drill down more about how do these EOs and the things that we've talked about actually get applied in how the government makes decisions. And then we're going to do the same at the state level as a separate training just on state advocacy and how these laws get applied in kind of on the ground, what communities face when government is making decisions. We'll also be doing other trainings on economic tools and analysis that the government uses and that also communities can use to enhance their advocacy. We'll be doing also a training on procedural justice and public utility commissions, energy commissions. So we'll talk about kind of more detailed about demystifying those types of agencies. And we really look forward and thank everyone for joining. And we're excited to continue the conversation. And as Michelle's pointing out, we look forward to taking a lot of the questions you asked here, the ones we didn't get to, as well as the ones that were asked, and addressing them in additional issue brief that will also be posted on the TCTAC site. So you can look for that as well. So thank you everyone for joining. Again, we hope that everyone found this useful. And if you have any more questions, please, complete the survey. You can ask additional questions there, or you can flat out request technical assistance with that second one, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you to Kim Gaddy for everything that you do, the inspiration, the hard work, and for kind of taking a lot of the stuff that we talked about and contextualizing it into the real world and how the battle it takes to actually get this stuff down. Again, thank you everyone, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.